Good afternoon and welcome to session 10, Connecting Landowners to Public Soil Health, Technical and Financial Resources. I have just shared with our presenters that I'm just really excited about this conversation and have been looking forward to this all day. This session is focused on building connections to the resources available around soil health in the state of Maryland. So all of the folks that are with us today are in Maryland, are doing work in Maryland. And we hope that we'll leave this session with a better understanding of the universe of service providers and soil health networks around the state. That will leave with a better understanding of how landowners and operators can engage with various service providers around soil health. We'll leave with some ideas on ways to find mentors who you might tap to work with your landowners and operators. And finally, with some potential strategies for expanding the adoption of soil health practices on permanently protected farmland. We've got some really great guests with us today from Maryland NRCS and Maryland Department of Agriculture and the Million Acre Challenge. They will be giving a very short kind of presentation, and then we can really focus in on a real interactive, engaged kind of conversation and discussion and some brainstorming as part of that. So I'll be facilitating our conversation. I also will be taking as many notes as possible so that we can capture this and send this to you all after the session. I hope that you will feel free to chime in, that you'll contribute either via chat or that you will raise your Zoom hand or your real life hand or just unmute yourself and have this be just a really informal conversation. Please feel free to kind of engage in whatever way that you would like. Before we get started, let's do just a brief round of introductions. And I know that we did this in day one. Maybe a refresher for some of us would be nice. So maybe we'll go through and maybe alphabetically, and if you can share your name, your organization or entity, and your role, and we can go through that and then we can get started with our presentations. So let's get started with the A's. And Elisa, if you wouldn't mind going, I hope I said that right.
You did. I'm hoping the friends or the participants is on my screen. I can't quite get that off. So hopefully you can see me and hear me.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm Elisa Webb, and I'm the executive director for the Cecil Land Trust in Cecil County, Maryland.
Wonderful. Amanda.
Thanks. I'm Amanda Cather. I'm the project director for the Million Acre Challenge, and I'm also a pastured livestock producer in Montgomery County.
Anne. Maybe Anne is, I thought I saw her earlier, but we'll come back to Anne.
Sorry.
Or maybe here you are. You're Anne. Yeah. I'm sorry. My apologies.
No, it's okay. No, my internet's a little wonky today, so it's cutting in and out, so I didn't hear you say my name. I'm Annie Rossi-Gill. I'm a resource soil scientist with NRCS in Maryland, and I work out of the Talbot County office in Easton, but I cover the whole Eastern Shore.
Great, thank you. Caroline.
Hi, I'm Caroline Trosbach. I'm a farm planner at St. Mary's Soil Conservation District, but I'm with Maryland Department of Agriculture.
Wonderful. Colleen.
Hi, I'm Colleen Kiefer. I'm the district conservationist in Calvert County for NRCS.
Great, thank you. David.
This is Dave Satterfield from the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy. I'm the Land Program Manager.
Wonderful. Frank, you may have just joined us, but we're doing introductions. Your name and your organization and your role.
Frank Deere, I'm Lower Shore Land Trust. I am Stewardship Coordinator.
Wonderful. Heather. There you are.
Hi, I'm Heather with the PG Soil Conservation District, so with the Maryland Department.
Thank you. Jared.
Hello, I'm Jared Parks. I'm with the Lower Shore Land Trust, and I'm the Land Programs Manager.
Great. And Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer. I'm with Maryland Department of Agriculture out of Calvert Soil Conservation District, and I'm a planner.
Thank you. Jordan.
Hi, everybody. Jordan Bailey. I'm with Maryland NRCS. Within the last month or two, I've transitioned to be the program manager for RCPP, CSP, and AMA. So I have lots of acronyms I can talk about. Before that, I was in Queen Anne's County as a soil conservationist.
Thank you, Jordan. Kevin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin. I'm the Healthy Soils Program Coordinator at MDA.
Larissa.
Hi, I'm Larissa. I work at Eastern Shore Land Conservancy, and I'm the restoration specialist.
Michelle is having problems where you can't hear us anymore. If you can hear me, I would go to the Pathable platform, and you can ask for some technical help. And I will also let my colleague Beth know so that we can have someone in here to help you, and we'll come back to you. Nathan. All right. How about Ryan?
Hi, I'm Ryan. I'm a board member with the Cecil Land Trust, and I also work at the Cecil Soil Conservation District as an erosion sediment control plan reviewer.
Great. And Susan.
I'm Susan Lamb. I'm a resource conservationist in the Maryland State Office in Annapolis. I'm with NRCS, sorry.
Wonderful. Did I inadvertently miss anyone? Super. All right. Hopefully, Michelle, if you can hear us, we are giving some tech support for you as we speak. Super. So let's dive into to the short presentations that we're going to have. And Susan, I would love if you would kind of kick us off.
Sure, I will give it a try. I wish this were shorter, but there's a lot to cover when it comes to NRCS programs and soil health. It is one of our focuses. There we go. So NRCS soil health resources, we've got technical and financial assistance. You've already met Colleen Kiefer, District Conservationist in Calvert County, Jordan Bailey, our Farm Bill Program Specialist in Annapolis, and she's got RCPP and CSP and AMA programs, and we'll get into that alphabet soup in a bit. We've got Annie Rossi Gill, who's a resource soil scientist, and she's working a lot with soil health and special projects. And myself, I'm a resource conservationist in the Annapolis State Office. My objectives here today to look at the types of technical assistance with a focus on soil health, to outline the typical steps to access NRCS assistance, and help you through the alphabet soup of the programs, the financial assistance programs that are available that contain soil health related practices. So sustaining agricultural productivity has been a focus of NRCS from the very beginning. From the crisis of the Dust Bowl, we've worked towards building, understanding soil erosion, disseminating information and about soil degradation and fixing those problems, building on the science solutions, mapping soils, studying erosion, developing models, plant materials, and all sorts of things that have been a focus on the agency. Now we're moving forward from reducing erosion and a focus on that to building soil health and resilience and conserving all types of natural resources on agricultural and privately owned lands. So with technical assistance, we have lots of resources available regarding soil health assessment. We've got ongoing special studies in the field assisting in field soil health assessment with projects through grant-funded projects, university projects. I would like us to become a little bit more involved in sampling strategy development as people enter into conservation innovation grants and RCPP projects where we're looking at soil health and to develop an efficient and effective sampling strategy. I mean, we always want comprehensive data collection, but we always are confronted with limitations of time and money when it comes to sampling. When you're sampling in a setting where you have these complex processes that you're trying to look at the effects of management on soil health, it may take a while for those processes to result in a measurable change. So if you're working on conducting a study or developing a study, I would suggest that you ask for some advice that's born of experience from a person like Annie, who's done a lot of work in the field, or other people in NRCS in the state. They've got experience. I was just involved in a conservation innovation grant review where I thought the proposed sampling strategy was, or actually it's an ongoing one. It's already constructed and proposed, and the grant has been granted, but the sampling is going to, in my mind, waste a lot of money for samples that will show no perceptible difference or just confusing differences where you can't separate out the treatment effects. So we've got in-field assessment tools that we've developed. We have a soil health card. All the states in the nation have developed some product like this. And we wanted to keep ours simple, indicator-based. It's a scoring thing, and it's qualitative. We've got available in all the field offices a soil health bucket kit. There's a lot more parameters measured. It's semi-quantitative to quantitative results. It takes a lot longer and a lot more knowledge and involvement to use that soil health bucket kit. But of course, you get more information, for instance, like on aggregate stability. We provide training as part of our technical assistance, training for the field staff in the classroom or the virtual classroom these days, on the job training, in the field training, wanting people to get out, get their hands dirty and get to know the soils and the soil qualities in the areas they work in. And we're also trying to get people to integrate soil health principles explicitly into all the facets of what we do. We do a lot of different types of things, and soil health, we bring it up over and over. On NRCS websites, there's tons of pamphlets for outreach and information. We've got fact sheets for producers and land managers. We've got information for educators. We've got demonstration, like recipe books for demonstrations. My favorite demonstration always is that slake test. good for a wide variety of ages of audience and a wide variety of backgrounds. It's a real eye-opener to some people. So I always recommend that you look into using that one. I've got lots of tips on using that one. You can kind of stack the deck if you're trying to make a demonstration work for you. NRCS participation in things like field days, events, courses, such as the Master Naturalists and the Watershed Stewards and this group. We might be available for presentations. We always try, but our availability may be seasonally limited based on the staffing, the workload, and the when we're in the middle of program season. You're not going to get a person like Colleen able to come in and give a long presentation that she's got to prepare. But we can always try and find somebody who can make a presentation on soil health. And this is a website link to a bunch of the soil health resources, and there's videos by state soil health champions and things like that. Lots of videos of like the minute ones of Rock and Ray Archuleta preaching the gospel of soil health. And then for soil information, the Web Soil Survey, it's my go-to thing. I helped to develop a few county soil surveys. Soil health related interpretations are available in Web Soil Survey. You need to dig a little bit, but it says soil health right there. We've got land capability class, which is an old interpretive classification of soils, but it helps you categorize soils based on their types of limitations. And you can assist landowners, especially if you're working with a landowner who's very new to that land or to land management in general, getting the right land use in the right place, maximizing a soil's function for its best suited roles in the environment, not trying to work against Mother Nature to make it do things, make soils do things that they're not suited to. Likewise, we have another interpretation about soil vulnerabilities. That one's a little bit from a negative perspective in my view. It has a lot of detail about what the limitations are for land management and maintaining or improving soil health. What are the challenges that you're going to encounter when trying to manage that particular soil? For conservation planning, that's part of our technical assistance. Conservation planning is a voluntary activity on the part of the landowner. There are places where it is not voluntary, such as in the Chesapeake Bay critical area or in ag preservation or a few other situations. Sometimes county by county, they have reasons to require that a person has a conservation plan. In the conservation planning process, landowners or farm operators are, we work with them to determine their goals. We assess all the pertinent resources on the farm. We develop a plan based on the conservation practices that we have. We have a list of 122 conservation practices in Maryland, and at least 50 of those have direct beneficial effects on soil health. And many of the other practices that we implement or encourage people to implement have indirect beneficial effects on soil health, or they could be part of a system that directly or indirectly benefits soil health. So sometimes it's the way in which you use that particular conservation practice. Each conservation practice has a set of written standards, and we work with those. We work with all types of production systems, agricultural production systems, as well as forestry and wildlife lands. In planning for soil health, we've got ongoing training for field staff in Maryland and the Conservation Partnership, and that partnership is composed of NRCS, Maryland Department of Agriculture, and the Conservation District staff who's involved in agricultural conservation planning. We're encouraging people to address soil health principles explicitly when they've interviewed that customer and the customer's goal is to improve soil health. Then we will write plans explicitly addressing those 4 soil health principles. We can model the effects of management systems on soil health using a tool that's originally developed for erosion modeling, but it has a component in the results called the soil conditioning index. And that soil conditioning index has a sub-factor on organic matter. Russell 2 takes a detailed systems input. It can be data hungry, it is complex, perhaps overly so, but you can look at trends in organic matter and soil condition using the organic matter sub-factor of the soil conditioning index. So I am trying to encourage people to use that model in determining the practice effects or the conservation plan effects on the soil health. And we can do that field by field, area by area, as detailed as we want to get. So we've got the soil health principles, and we can pick practices that address those. And in a typical grain operation, for minimizing soil disturbance, of course, no-till would be the way to go. Maximizing soil cover, we'd look at no-till and cover crop and incorporating those into the plan if the producer, especially if the producer's not already using these practices. Conservation crop rotation and cover crop can also help maximize biodiversity above ground and therefore below ground. And we can maximize continuous living roots in the ground using cover crop, conservation crop rotation, and perhaps something like pasture and hay planting, a longer term crop within the rotation. This is just one quick example of one type of system, how we would pull in the practices to address these soil health principles. And one thing I just want to point out with organic production, in my mind, the biggest challenge is addressing this do not disturb principle, substituting tillage or for pest control. But on to financial assistance programs. That was a very breezy overview of soil health technical assistance available. So once the producer has a conservation plan, we can help them access conservation programs for financial assistance. Financial assistance programs address resource concerns. So in the planning process, we determine what the resource concerns are, and when those line up with the goals of the programs, we would encourage the producers to enroll in the programs. Practices and scenarios can be selected to address soil quality limitations, and this is the category of resource concerns that directly address soil health. We look at aggregate instability, compaction, concentration of salts and other chemicals, organic matter depletion, soil organism habitat loss or degradation, and subsidence if you're working with people with organic soils, but we don't have much farmed organic soils in Maryland. So just a note, NRCS doesn't have an explicit soil health improvement program, but the practices and the scenarios of those practices that we fund can be put together in a soil health improvement package, so to speak. And just one teeny tiny example of how these scenarios work, probably one of the simplest ones, cover crop. We only have a few scenarios to choose from. And conservation programs are always taking conservation to a higher level. So say, for instance, your producer has been working with the MAX cover crop program for years, but they've just been doing planting winter wheat. Well, the only option, if they're going into the EQIP program, they could go to a multi-species cover crop. That's the only other scenario. They're already implementing your basic cover crop because they're doing the MAX program year after year. If they wanted to implement the multi-species cover crop, this is one choice available to them. Nowadays, the MAX program has a little more flexibility and encourages multi-species crops, and a lot of different soil health improvement principles can be sort of encouraged with the later planting dates and later termination dates. But this is just one teeny tiny example of picking scenarios to improve soil health using within the EQIP program. So with the program, the producer and must be eligible. Actually, there's a set of criteria for eligibility, and that staff in the field offices can assist a producer in determining whether they're eligible for any particular program. Broadly speaking, all of the programs, the producer has to be eligible. They can be entities, the landowner, whoever it is has to have a significant interest in an agricultural or forestry operation that's being offered for the program. They must have control of the land, and they have to have permission to install or plant the practices if they're not the owner but renting the land. So the land has to be eligible. It can be privately owned land, tribal land, leased land, or in a lot of cases, public land with a few stipulations. If it's part of their agricultural operation, then even public land can be enrolled in some of the programs. Then the conservation practices that the person wants to implement have to be eligible. Practices have to improve an identified resource concern on that land, and they must be planned to meet NRCS standards and on the list of the state practices offered for financial assistance, and they have to take conservation to a higher level. They can't already be implementing that practice to the full extent. All the programs are competitive programs, and applications are ranked. There are numerous fund pools with different ranking criteria and different focus. The application deadlines for the annual funding cycle are announced, but we take applications all year round. So once the producer's ready to go, we might encourage them to apply, but we have these funding windows for each fiscal year. Financial assistance programs result in contracts. So that farmer or producer or landowner has a contract with government to implement conservation practices. When they have that contract, the practices implemented have to meet standard, and at the outset of the contract, we provide all the designs and the details that are needed to implement all the practices in their contract. The participants themselves arrange to install or construct or plant or do it themselves for all of the practices. So they might work with a contractor to construct a structure or install a waterway, or maybe a custom operator to plant something. But they make those arrangements with their installer or themselves. And then once the practice is installed and is certified by the field office staff, then it's reimbursed. So there are reimbursement programs, they're competitive programs, and they're contracts. There are numerous scenarios for a lot of the practices. And we can't really ask, and this is sometimes a frequent question, well, what percentage of the cost of a project does NRCS cover? And the answer is always, well, it depends. Cost lists are available. They're based on cost scenarios. They're regional. Scenarios are based on all the components, like the time that an excavator might be needed, the time the equipment operator, all of the costs, the labor, the equipment, the materials, the seed, and then a cost per unit of that practice scenario is determined. And then payment rates are set, and sometimes those payment rates vary by the program or the status of that participant. We have higher rates for historically underserved participants, and sometimes we have higher rates for priority practices or priority resource concerns or areas. And just to let you know, the document that contains all of the Maryland scenarios is more than 1,000 pages long. So that's why I say this is a really quick overview here. So now I'm going to dive into the alphabet soup of the conservation programs that we use commonly in Maryland. I'm leaving several of them out because they don't really have a lot of soil health practices in them. But EQIP, this is kind of our main one, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, RCPP, and I'll go into each of these a little bit more in following slides. The Regional Conservation Partnership Program, the CSP or Conservation Stewardship Program, and Conservation Innovation Grants. This one's a little bit different because it is truly a grant program. So EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, is the old workhorse of the NRCS programs. There are national and state resource concern priorities. So the practices that are being enrolled in are offered for enrollment in the program have to meet one of these national or state priorities. That's easy because the priorities are so broad. It's hard not to. They include conservation of ground and surface water resources, reduction of emissions, reduction in soil erosion and sedimentation from unacceptable levels on agricultural land, promoting at-risk species habitat conservation, biological carbon storage and sequestration, and just there's a long list that I'm not going to go all the way through unless everybody wants me to. There are locally led funding priorities, resource concerns that are selected by the counties or the local areas to focus some funding on. There are numerous soil health related practices on our list of conservation practices that can receive financial assistance. As I said before, there are higher payment rates for historically underserved participants, and that includes socially disadvantaged people, beginning farmers, limited resource farmers, and veteran beginning farmers. This link here is to the Maryland programs webpage, and each of these programs has a little bit more information on it in there. The Conservation Stewardship Program is designed to reward producers for conservation that they have already implemented. They are stewards. They have to meet a threshold through assessment for a certain number of resource concerns that are determined by the state and the national program. The program is designed to encourage people to take conservation to a higher level by doing activities or enhancements that go beyond the basic conservation practices. The program, if somebody's accepted into the program, they get annual payments for 5 years. It's a 5-year contract, and each year they get a payment for the number of resource concerns they meet at the time that they apply. They get a payment for the land that they enroll, so a per acre payment. So these two payments are rewarding them for the conservation already implemented. And then there are payments for the activities or enhancements that they do in the year that those are installed. So each year the payment includes these two, and in the years that they do something, then they get the activity payment. The Resource Conservation Partnership Program. Do you want to take it away, Jordan?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Am I coming in okay?
Yeah, this is great. This is really helpful. And I also, just so that we preserve enough time for our other speakers and then real robust conversation, if maybe we can conclude this portion in maybe 3 or 4 minutes, or maybe 5, that would be great. Thank you so much.
I can give the briefest RCPP overview there's ever been. So nationwide, this is a standalone fund that NRCS can access with partners applying to us. So it's $300 million allocated. It is split either half between the states within that pool, and the other half is within these critical conservation areas. So it's a large pot of money. Some places like Maryland and some of our surrounding states have the ability to apply to both. The solid areas you see on the nationwide map generally go around watersheds. The 2 you see with hatches are more habitat based, but if you're a state that's lucky or maybe unlucky enough to be one of these critical areas, we do have more funds accessible to us. So to be able to apply for these programs, the RCPP money is there to promote coordination between NRCS and partners. This is a complete partnership project. We enter into this together and we complete it together. You have to hit 3 bullets here. You want to implement projects for innovative solutions. So partners coming to NRCS to apply for these funds want to be thinking about what they can fix in their area. They want to be able to provide measurable improvements, and they want those outcomes to improve resource concerns. And those are what Susan just went over, erosion, soil health, anything that falls into that gamut of things that we offer. All right, so a quick overview of how it works is that the partners apply to NRCS for project awards. We have every year a funding cycle that opens up. This year it's not open yet, to be determined. And then we'll have selected projects that have their own funding pool. So once we've selected a project, our partner helps us manage these funds, and we have participants apply in and we give it out just like all of our other programs such as EQIP. Again, you have to meet most of the basic eligibility requirements for NRCS programs. When the partners are applying to NRCS for an RCPP project, they have to be interested, obviously, in working with NRCS. This isn't a program where we just hand over the money. It's a partnership that continues. They have to present a project focused on the RCPP goals that I just gone over about measurable outcomes, resource concerns. The land itself can be agricultural, NIPF, the private forest, or associated lands. I'm not sure how many of those bullets are going to pop up there. I think we might have one more. There we go. So so these top 3 pull into our land management, a lot of the resource concerns such as EQIP that you're kind of used to saying, hey, we have a problem, let's fix it. The 2 projects we tend to fund in the Maryland and Chesapeake Bay area fall into those top 3, or the entity held easements. And then as far as how to apply, like I already mentioned, we have an annual cycle that opens up for partners. I would be the contact for that. If anyone is interested in, either this year or following years, the NRCS Maryland website, unfortunately, I am new to the position. Things haven't been transferred over. So if you look up RCPP in Maryland and see Carol Rivera's name, don't email her, email me instead. And I wanted to point out, I'm Jordan.Bailey 2. There's also an original Jordan Bailey and a number 3. Sometimes they forward me emails, not always. So make sure you get the 2 in there. So we have the 2 parts of this for RCPP. The partners apply to NRCS to get a project off the ground. It's usually a multi-year project. And then after those funds are secured with the partner, producers then apply to that standalone pot of money within our state. So it's a way for partners to bring more funds into the state, often directed towards something that they see hey, from our outreach and from talking to people, this is something that people want and people will apply for. Those partners, just like every other project, they're gonna look for announcements, annual funding rounds that come out, and then they will reach out to their local NRCS counties, the field offices, that will put those applications together for them. A big part of the RCPP funds from the partners, from the NRCS state field offices, nonprofits, whoever we're working with, is outreach to let people know that these funds exist to be applied for. And then in a nutshell, we generally have maybe 2 RCPP projects that are funded every year. Right now we have 8 active projects, 4 are in this critical conservation area pot of money, 3 are within the state. And then there is a certain amount of money set aside every year for national ones. Right now we have an active one with several states in the region for cerulean warblers. So I'll give you one quick example here if you want to pull up a bunch of the tabs. I won't read too much of it. We have an RCPP that's wrapping up in the state right now. Just to kind of give you in a nutshell of components of some of these programs, you'll have a lead partner, sometimes a land trust, sometimes the state. The funding pool, again, can pull from the state or the CCA. You'll have a lead state if it's a multi-state project. Sometimes it'll just be Maryland though. A certain amount of years that the funds are there in the project, the partnership will be available. They'll have a primary resource concern and additional resource concerns. And then the more you get into the project, sometimes it'll focus on a certain geographic area, certain counties are involved, or they might have certain parameters of where you are in the state and what you can offer on your land. You'll have a rationale for this one. The counties that had the highest concentration of dairy and livestock operations were included. And you'll have the core practices. So not only do we have acronyms, we have lots of numeric codes that you may or may not have memorized. And in addition to those primary ones, you'll have some supplemental ones too. So when the participants come to us to get these funds, they'll be focusing on those practices. That's all I have.
One last program that I said I would mention a little bit more on is the Conservation Innovation Grants. This is truly a grant program where you put together an application package. The FY21 topics were these 3, and if you look at this third one, soil health and regenerative agriculture was one of the topics. I don't know, I looked for it. We don't have FY22 information out. I don't know whether the topics will be the same or new ones or some combination. Here's a website for Maryland for conservation innovation grants. There's also national grants that cross state boundaries for the project areas. The website also has lots of forums and guidance and webinars and a whole lot more information. So if you're interested in the conservation innovation grants, then I would recommend that you do a little looking to see if it suits your program's needs, and then work from there. The contact information for the program manager in Maryland is on the website. That would be Mikkel Williams.
Wonderful.
So
thank you so much.
That's all we've got.
Great.
Sorry,
thank you so much, Susan and Jordan. Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you now if you can give us an overview of the Department of Ag's resources in like 10 or 15 minutes.
My name's Kevin. I'm the Healthy Soils Program Coordinator at MDA, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the different programs that we have at the state for producers that are interested in implementing soil health practices. So we have a handful. I'm really going to just focus on 3. 2 of them are active now, and then 1 is kind of on the horizon. So the first one is called the Farming for Healthy Soils Grant. This is based off of 3 years of funding that we have from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. I'll also talk a little bit about the Maryland Agricultural Water Quality Cost Share Program, which is the MAX program. And then I'll talk about the forthcoming Healthy Soils program. And this is going to it's going to serve basically as a replacement for the grant program that we have now, since that's kind of based on temporary funding. So the Farming for Healthy Soils grant, it supports new practice implementation of 4 practices specifically. So you can see them there. We've got cover crops, prescribed grazing, nutrient management, and no-till and reduced till. One note that I'll add in here, we get a lot of questions about, what's considered new, what's not new, and especially around cover crops for farmers in the state, because, a lot of people have been doing cover crops for a long time. It's new if you're kind of making changes to it. So similar to what Susan said, if you're adding a different species, or even if you're just trying out a new species, or adopting extended planting years, planting early, terminating late, that kind of thing. Those count as new practices. And the purpose of this is really twofold. So, we're obviously trying to get farmers to implement these practices, but another portion of the grant is some data collection to help us understand what these practices are actually doing to the soil, and see if we can kind of track any changes that we can attribute to these practices. So we are going out to collect soil samples, and we're doing active carbon testing and soil microbial respiration testing, as well as the soil health card, which is something that Susan mentioned in the last presentation. And we're doing that in partnership with NRCS, mostly Annie, who's also on the call with us, has been going out to all the sites. And we do have financial and technical assistance available as part of this grant. So producers can get up to $5,000 per year for implementing these practices. And they're based on the acreages that are enrolled, and each practice has a different rate. Which I could, we have information I can send to people if they're interested. And these funds are available until 2023. That's when our NIFWIF grant expires. So I just wanted to show you an example of some of the data that we collected in the first year. And this is something that we share with the producers that are enrolled in the program as well. So here you can see kind of the average results for the row crop farmers that are in the program this year. So they would get these average results as well as their individual farm results. So they can kind of see how they compare with other producers that are enrolled in the program. And this first year obviously is kind of more of a baseline year. And then in the third year of the grant where we retest, hopefully we'll see, some changes or see, what has happened in their soil. And we also break it out for the averages. We have it broken out by soil texture, but for the individual results, we have them for each different soil type that we sampled. And then I just wanted to show this presentation is also uploaded to Pathable, so people can look at this in more detail. But this is the soil health card that we use. You can see all the indicators listed on the left. And then the matrix inside is kind of what score they get based on the different descriptions. It's probably a little too small to read, but you can go in and kind of look at, if someone scores good in one indicator, this is what we saw. And then you total up their score and they get kind of an excellent, good, fair, or poor rating. And that is what, to go back to this slide, that's what the chart on the right is showing. It's showing their health card score results. So that's the Healthy Soils Grant Program. We also have the Max Capital Program. So there are currently over 40 NRCS practices that are eligible for cost share under this program. And some of those are high priority practices. I think it's almost half of the eligible practices that are now eligible for up to 100% cost share. And the remaining practices, the rates are up to 87.5%. And this program was established to focus on water quality, but there's been some recent legislation that it allows MACs to recognize environmental co-benefits, and one of those is soil health. So that's why I'm talking about the program today. And I also included a link down at the bottom for more information. So on this website, you can find every practice that's eligible and each one of those links to kind of more details about, what you would have to do, what the flat rates are, those kind, and what the cost share rates are and that sort of thing. There's also the Max Cover Crop program, which is a little different than the capital program. Again, this one is focused on water quality outcomes, but it does have soil health co-benefits. For the last 5 years, we've averaged, a little over 450,000 acres per year. And as Susan alluded to earlier, some new incentives this year for multi-species and extended species plantings were added. So the way that works is, if you want to plant cover crops, you kind of get this flat rate per acre. I think this year was $45 an acre. And that is, if you just planted rye by a certain date, that's what you would get. But if you added multi-species planting, if you planted early, if you agree to terminate late, you can bump that payment up. I think the maximum this year was like $85 an acre, depending if you did all the incentives. I could be a little off, but I think it's around there. And then I also added this picture on the side to show that, we do have some resources for farmers operating on leased acres. I know that's a big concern for a lot of people. And the link at the bottom of this image will go to some of the resources that Sarah talked about in an earlier presentation today. And we work with the Harry Hughes Center pretty often. So we have resources with them as well. And then, so this last program, like I said, it's forthcoming. So this doesn't exist yet, but just to give you an idea of some of the things we're thinking about at the state, this is most of what my job is administering the grant program, but also helping to kind of frame the new program with the help of Alicia at the department and the advisory committee that we have. So we're thinking through kind of two options right now. And the first, well, then these would kind of exist concurrently. So they both happen at the same time. The first is a grant program. And this would be focused specifically on small farms and soil health research plots. So for a lot of our programs, there's, an acreage requirement. For the cover crop program, you need to have at least 5 acres enrolled. And there's a lot of farms in the state that don't meet that 5 acreage minimum. And there's a lot of farms that are diversified. They don't really fit well into current state programs. So this grant program is really geared towards them. And we want people to kind of come to us and tell us what they need. And obviously, we have a lot of details to flesh out, but that's kind of the direction that we're leaning with this grant program. And it would also fund research plots. So this could be anything from, trialing cover crops after a different species that doesn't currently qualify for state programs, or planting cover crops in a different time of the year. It's not the winter period, but maybe getting cost share on, if your fields are going to sit fallow in the summertime, getting cost share on those kind of cover crops. Or it could be like nutrient trials, those kinds of things. And then the other thing that we're thinking about is the cover crop. Right now we're calling it the Cover Crop Plus program, but that's kind of just a placeholder name so we can call it something. This kind of takes what we've learned from the Max program and kind of adjust things a little bit to kind of focus more on soil health rather than the water quality benefits. So this would be kind of like longer term contracts with producers. Right now, we're kind of thinking 5 or so years. And it would only be for extended season and multi-species cover crops. And I think the soil health benefits of cover crops really come when you're planting them and they get enough biomass to actually kind of build up the organic matter in the soil and that sort of thing. And soil health is something that kind of changes over longer time scales. So thinking about soil health practices as an annual practice, you can do it, but I think it's I think it's helpful to think about these things more holistically and over the long term. So like I said, additional details about this are coming. We're working with our advisory committee to get more input and to develop these programs further. But these are some of the things on the horizon for the state. And then we have a whole suite of other programs that I'm not going to get into the details on, but you can find more information for these on the MDA website. So there's the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, there's a manure transport program, income tax subtraction, low interest loans for conservation equipment. We also have a manure injection cost share for people who want to no-till incorporate manure into their fields. One last thing I do want to mention are some of the regulatory requirements. So all producers participating in the state programs, they are required to have an active nutrient management plan. And in some cases, they also need to have an active conservation plan. I mean, this would be for things like the higher cost share for the max capital projects and those sorts of things. But for a lot of stuff, it's just a nutrient management plan. So for the Healthy Soils Grant Program that I'm running right now, they only need to have a nutrient management plan. They don't necessarily have to have a conservation plan, even though that, it would be beneficial. And then here is my contact information. Any questions, reach out to me anytime. You can email me or give me a call. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Kevin. Amanda, you're up next.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize if anyone hears a loud dog barking behind me. She's very opinionated and feels that she should be in the room with me. So apologies if she barks. All right, can you see my screen? Great, thank you. So my name is Amanda. I am the project director with the Millionaire Challenge, and we are a collaborative of 6 founding organizations plus other partners and producers that we're engaged with. And our mission, we're funded by a grant from the Town Creek Foundation for 3 years of what we hope will be a 10-year project to work with farmers to build healthy soils on 1 million acres across the state of Maryland and the greater Chesapeake region by 2030. And we do this in a number of ways, and particularly in partnership with the folks that you've heard already. So it's very important to us to work with NRCS, and we're fortunate to be the recipient of an RCPP award, which we are just in the process of negotiating the agreement with NRCS, and that award will hopefully help us get some funding on the ground for soil health management systems for producers in the next couple of months. And with Jordan's help, we will get that going. So we're very excited about that, and definitely always working with Kevin and Alicia at the Department of Agriculture to help build producer demand for their programs and do outreach for those programs and help connect farmers with resources to help them improve their soils. So farmer to farmer networking is a huge part of our work. During the pandemic, we've been doing it virtually. We offer monthly lunch and learns, just very short producer presentations on what they're doing on their farm, a chance for Q&A. Those have been really well attended, and they're exciting and fun. We're also building out soil health hubs, and those are, again, chances for farmers to meet and share information with one another, ask questions, peer-to-peer networking. We have been, again, doing those once a month, and they've been virtual. We are really hopeful that we'll be able to start in-person soil health hubs beginning as soon as this fall. So that if that is something that you know some farmers who would be interested in starting a soil health hub in your region, we would be really excited to work with you to start that up. So our farmer to farmer networking. We also will have a small grants program. This seems to be a theme that we are hoping to launch an application for in October. And that will help farmers install, again, soil health management systems. So we're hoping that they will be working on more than one practice that they'd like to implement, or integrating a new practice into already existing systems of soil health management. As Kevin said, I think our goal is really to help folks think about soil health in a holistic framework, and starting to think about their farm as a functioning ecosystem with the soil health as the foundation for a lot of other ecosystem services, and addressing a lot of other resource concerns, exactly as Susan talked about earlier. So those grants, look for those. That'll be fun, and hopefully will also provide some initial information for Kevin and Alicia for their longer term soil health grants program as we see what the demand is. So another thing that we do is soil health testing and benchmarking. So we have a program that was begun by PASA, the Pennsylvania Sustainable Agriculture Association, and it provides free soil health testing for row crop farmers, for diversified vegetable farmers, and for pastured livestock producers. And we test on 3 fields every year. And like the Maryland, the MDA Healthy Soils program, we offer farmers both individualized results and also comparisons with like farms. So livestock farms compared to livestock farms, and grain farms compared with grain farms, and shows them how they're doing in those categories compared to farms who are like them, hopefully also like them in soil types, since we know that that has a huge impact on different soil types across the state. So we are looking for additional farms, particularly on the Eastern Shore and in Western Maryland and Southern Maryland, to take part in that soil health testing and benchmarking study, if anyone knows any farmers who might be interested. Those farmers are also networked and have opportunities for meeting up with other farmers and getting some feedback. The connection there is really looking at how soil health management impacts soil health outcomes. So that's really the work that they do in the networking meetings, is talking through what are your management decision indicators that you're seeing. Let's see, what else? We are working on developing some profitability models, particularly for vegetable operations. I think American Farmland Trust has done an incredible job of creating some case studies on soil health economic impacts on the economic impacts of soil health practices on row crop farms. We've been working on a model with diversified veg farms that's almost ready for some farmers to help test it. So if you know any diversified vegetable farmers who might be interested in helping us test that out, and also a transition model for row crop farmers. So we're working on those, and again, they're almost ready for publication. We've been doing a lot in the last 2 years that's just about ready to launch. Along those lines, we are also working with the University of Maryland on an organic grains transition project. So looking into the economic and environmental impacts of various methods of transitioning to organic for grain producers, and what are the impacts of those? What's the financial outcomes? What are the environmental outcomes? And again, organic production, as Susan pointed out, has its pluses and minuses, and looking into how the different transition methods can impact those is part of what this study is aimed at. We're also working on just beginning work on consumer engagement. So trying to build demand and awareness among consumers for regionally grown products that are grown in healthy soils, and also supply chain engagement. So trying to build, again, partnerships, relationships between important purchasers in the area who might want to purchase from farms with who are using healthy soils practices. So this is, again, it's an ongoing project and a beginning work on this that we hope we can do in order to help provide additional incentives for farmers to use these practices. So, worth knowing, we do have, there's Heidi barking, our soil health hub meetings are ongoing in October. They will be the first 3 Thursdays of the month at 7:30 in the morning. We'll do the first focused on row crop farmers, the second focused on specialty crop farmers, and the third focused on pastured livestock producers. And those will be virtual. As I said, we're really hoping to get back in person, but we're still virtual for now. We have our Soil Health to Go. That's our lunch and learn monthly on the second Wednesday. And follow us on social media. We would love to list all kinds of soil health events and resources on our website, in our monthly newsletter, and all the other options that we have there. So connect with us, and we would love to help you. So I'm going to stop sharing and mute myself so you don't hear Heidi, and look forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Susan, Jordan, Kevin, and Amanda, for a really helpful overview of some of the technical and financial resources available in Maryland around soil health. I've got some kind of discussion questions to help kind of get the conversation started. And the first one is directed towards our presenters and other Maryland Department of Ag and NRCS folks, and frankly, anybody who has ideas around this. But so there are obviously other service providers, both public and private, that are not here with us today, but can be an important resource to our operators and landowners. Who are some of these folks, and what kind of resources do they provide? And what is the best way for these folks that are participating here, our land trusts and public PACE employees, to get to know
them? I'll mention two of our other partners on the Healthy Soils grant that we have. So we're working with the 4R Alliance and Shore Rivers on the Eastern Shore to help with outreach to farmers. The 4R Alliance really specializes in nutrient management, things like, split applications or variable rate applications, those sorts of things. They'd be a really great resource for anyone who's interested in those types of practices. And then Shore Rivers is also really focused on water quality in rivers around on the Eastern Shore, hence the name, obviously. And they do a lot of field days and are some trusted advisors for a lot of producers on the Eastern Shore, and they're worth reaching out to, especially if people have concerns kind of about thinking about like drainage on their fields, improving soil erosion through like grass waterways, those types of things. I think they'd be a great resource for producers as well.
I'd also say two of the Million Acre Challenge partner organizations. Future Harvest is a great resource for especially for small and mid-scale diversified farms. They do a lot of workshops and have a lot of resources for that size of farm. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation has also a lot of relationships with smaller scale and mid-scale farms, and also pastured livestock producers doing a lot of grazing work in Maryland and the region. So both of those organizations can also be resources for folks.
So we've talked a lot about the importance of having a network of mentors available to help farmers and landowners. And farmers and landowners are often the best soil health advocates as well. So are there, and maybe Amanda, you want to talk more about the hubs, are there other networks of farmer mentors in Maryland that the folks who are joining us here today for the training should know about, and how can they, what's the best way of connecting with them? And suggesting, and any advice you have in terms of suggesting and helping a farmer connect with those mentor networks.
I think the Mountains to Bay Grazing Alliance is a really great example of mentor network that works well for pastured livestock producers. We would really like to start working with folks to create networks for row crop farmers and for diversified vegetable farmers. Future Harvest does have some advanced learning circles that are not specifically soil health focused, but we're hoping to create those for those other types of farms, just because that Mountains to Bay Grazing Alliance mentor network works so well and really has a great impact on that kind of producer. So that's something we'd like to work on and start building up in Maryland, and very open to partnering with folks on that and hearing about others that are already happening.
There's also the Soil Health Champions, which is through the soil conservation districts. There's a few in Maryland. I know, I think Steve Darcy is one, and he's one of the district managers for Prince George's County. So I think he could be a good point of contact if people want to connect with that network of farmers. Yeah.
It'd be great to get some more in Maryland.
So I guess this question is more directed to our participants here. Wondering what kind of feedback you've gotten from farmers and landowners about federal or state conservation programs. It could just be kind of conservation programs in general, or programs geared towards soil health. Do the folks that you work with generally know about these programs? Are they interested in these programs? Are you hearing a real reluctance to get involved with government programs? Or do they seem to be a really positive thing? What is your experience working with the folks that you do?
In general, my experience has been that landowners are less likely to open up to state or federal resources. They prefer to work with like the local land trusts like us, because we don't represent government. That's sort of the experience I've had on the Eastern Shore.
So with the MOUth program here in Maryland, we found that many of our easement owners also participate in the MAX program, so the cost share program. We have actually found a incentive for when there could be violations on the easements that they don't, if they're not working with us in good faith. One of our threats is saying you won't be eligible for future MAX participation, and that a lot of times will bring them back to the table to resolve an easement violation. So a lot of our easement owners do definitely use the MAX program. And since we're all in the same agency, it's just like we won't acquire new easements until we have a verified and implemented soil conservation plan as well as nutrient management plan. We won't go to settlement. So we're like, when we have the power, this is our strength before we drop hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're going to make sure all the plans are in place, at least from day one, and then we go forward.
I mean, as sort of the opposing viewpoint, are you concerned that should that get around the community, that would hurt MOUth numbers because
No.
they may feel threatened?
No, because they're violating an agreement that they had entered into voluntarily that they got paid for. So we don't do. I mean, we never do that in our first option, and sometimes we'll be working people with more than a year before we ever, before they stop making a good faith effort. We do everything we can, even it's taken us 5, 8, 10 years sometimes to resolve some matter, but as long as a landowner is working with us in good faith, we're not going to bring in, threaten with an attorney or threaten with max, or we also have the ability to impose civil penalties. But that's never our goal. Our goal is to have a good relationship with the landowner, because just because we quote win something, we still have a perpetual relationship with these people. So we try to make it as a friendly resolution as possible.
Yeah, I would say I can offer a perspective from both sides, being a current federal employee, but I also used to work in the nonprofit world with land trusts. So on the federal side, I think it's important to remember for everybody that the conservation districts are there as an entity nationwide to be a liaison between private and federal. That's why they were created. So I think it's important to use them in that way on both sides. On the nonprofit side, I will say I've never seen eyes roll so far in the back of the head when you say, hey, go for this federal money, because they think this is going to be more work than it's worth. So I think it's necessary to make it easy for people to access it and understand it. That's not always easy on the federal side when the Farm Bill changes every 5 years.
Buy-in to federal versus state programs here in Southern Maryland, Calvert County, it depends. We've got decent buy-in to the max cover crop program. That doesn't seem too hard for most people, although some people lately don't want to, are hesitant to get into federal programs are, I think there's more resistance to, but even lately we've had just a couple producers drop off of max cover crop state because they just don't want to deal with it, and they say, oh, we're still going to plant cover crop, we just don't want to deal with the regulations, or they don't want to deal with the hassle of turning in their nutrient management certification, which is required. Even, I don't know, it's a mixed bag. And then some people are excited and see their friends doing it, and that increases buy-in, but it's a mixed bag.
One thing that comes to mind for us for state programs is, as we're thinking about kind of this small grant program for smaller producers, we're kind of trying to take a step back and reevaluate what our application process is like, what our regulations are like, and that sort of thing, because we realize that beyond just the size limitation, there's a ton of other barriers that are stopping these smaller producers from enrolling in our programs. And so I think things like, complexity and flexibility will hopefully be addressed in a more comprehensive way than they are now. Obviously not completely, because I don't think we'll ever get there. But, I think for our grant program now, our application is like a page and a half long, I think. So we're really trying to make it specifically accessible to certain people, and I think that will help everyone in the long run.
So are the main kind of challenges or barriers to these farmers and landowners participating in these programs? It sounds like the regulations are a large barrier, and then the process of paperwork are also barriers. Do you have any more? Are there any other barriers that you're hearing from the folks that you're working with, or any more kind of insight around some of the barriers we've already talked about how we can help kind of remove those barriers for these farmers and landowners, and also how you're working with these folks who see these as barriers. How are you addressing that? Are you mostly listening to them? Are you trying to help them navigate, counsel them? What are the answers that you're giving to these folks who are exploring these programs?
Well, I would just say one more barrier that I think we run into a lot with all of these programs is that a lot of them are require participants to pay the upfront cost of everything. And I know that NRCS, we have some programs, and MDA, everybody has some programs that can offer some amount of assistance, but that's consistently a huge issue, especially right now with all the costs of a lot of our materials maybe not even being available, but all the costs of everything are certainly increased. Right now, I know MDA, I think, is working on things, and NRCS, we also are offering some opportunities to get increased payments and things like that. But I know in general, at least in Southern Maryland, I can speak to, and I'm pretty sure it's statewide, is there's definitely more of a need to have more options for these, especially smaller farms. I notice it with the most, to be able to fund these projects up front. We don't necessarily have the best mechanisms for that right now if they can't get the loans to cover the project in the first place. So.
And to follow on what Colleen just said, I think Prince George's district has developed its own fund to help limited resource and beginning farmers fund the upfront cost. I think it's a revolving loan fund or something like that that they have developed, which I think is a grand idea. I think that helps address that barrier, and the more districts who could do that with, some of them, I know they're sitting with a little bit of money in the bank. If they could put that money to work, that would overcome that one barrier. Another barrier I see, even when people are enrolled in the program, they've gone through all the work of the application process and worked with us to develop the plan and the contract, our standards are high, and sometimes they don't see the need or the requirement to meet every little detail of that way we require the practice to be implemented. So the more clear we can be at the outset that you've got to meet this, and this, or you've got to keep, in the case of CSP, you've got to keep all these records for us, or you've got to keep your seed tags or something. Those are barriers. Why do we have to build it this way when this other way will do just fine? We tend to specify Cadillacs when a Volkswagen might do.
I'll echo that to some degree. Having grown up on the farm, working on the farm, like making sure that people understand exactly what they have to do and how they have to do it is very important. I mean, we had a no-till drill, and we drilled everything into the ground except they ran a disc and a cultivator over top of it before they drilled. So you're really not doing yourself any favor by doing the bad practices and then doing the good practices to make yourself feel good. So I think helping people to understand exactly what they're supposed to be doing and why they're doing it the way they're doing it is important, which also goes to helping the long-term families who've been farming for generations to forget the way they used to farm and learn the way they should be farming today to have healthy soils.
I think that's good kind of in all of the fields. It's the whole managing expectations right from the start. If you let whomever it is that you're working with, the landowners, the producers, whether it's for healthy soil practices or for easement practices, if they know what to expect up front and there's not surprises on the other end, that's going to make that relationship much more friendly, because nobody likes bad surprises, especially if they cost more money.
I think one thought that I had about kind of the question of upfront costs and reimbursement grants and funds and those sorts of things. is I feel like that's it, it's kind of a balancing act between, you know, helping someone up front and then also having and like the institutional trust that comes along with that, right? Because you know, not only do the farmers have to trust us to not come after them for funds back if they don't do things exactly correctly, but we also have to trust the farmer. And I think that the two-way trust is ignored in a lot of the conversations where it's like, well, they don't trust the institutions, they don't trust the institutions. And I think we also really need to think about how like the institutions need to trust the people that they're working with. And not that we don't in every case, but you know, it's an important part of the conversation. And you know, I would hate to have to go after somebody, and I feel like that kind of disinterest in trying to get money back from somebody is one of the big pieces that limits those how many of those kinds of programs exist where like you pay something up front, if that makes sense.
This is Jared Parks. I was wondering if I could ask a question. I know with some of the practices like the buffer practices and things like that, they've removed the ability to have cost shared maintenance. Does that affect, is there a similar thing going on with the other practices that might affect soil health? And you know, could that end up being a barrier as well if you have to have these ongoing costs that are eating up your rental cost? Or you know, it's almost a disincentive to spend that much extra money to upkeep your practice that's not cost share helped. So I didn't know if that was a problem on some of these other practices, but it certainly is going to get to be on the buffers and some of those similar practices.
I believe you're referring specifically to CREP buffers, because
yes.
Maintenance is not part of like an equip installed practice. I hear that the new program or the new rules are bringing back the maintenance in the new contracts. I know that doesn't help with the, you know, it comes and it goes, that maintenance financial assistance in CRP and CREP. And I otherwise I don't really have an answer, but I did hear that they are bringing that back.
That's good to hear.
In terms of this idea of managing expectations and being really clear up front what needs to happen, how it needs to happen, when it needs to happen, and why, how are you all, how is that going? Has that been generally a pretty easy thing to do? Or have you run into issues with that? Any lessons learned or kind of frustrations you've had as you've tried to manage expectations with the folks that you're working with?
When I'm working with people in that very complex conservation stewardship program, I always, you know, caution them that we need to keep it simple. Let's sort of reduce our ambitions, because you look at it as like a catalog, you know, Christmas catalog of all these things that you could do, but it, you know, each of them is so complex. And I emphasize that record keeping. And if that's not your style, if you don't roll that way, that's going to be a very, very difficult program for you. And you're going to lose the trust of that conservation district, and you're going to possibly have to pay back money and things like that. So if I know that person well enough, I might not recommend that program for them. I might stick to EQIP, which is a little clearer in its expectations. The other thing, and I have worked with a lot of people over the years installing pollinator habitat, and I always tell them it takes a while. It takes years for that to be, and it's not going to look like the seed package that you see at the hardware store in the first year. And so I've had people come back to me and show me pictures, all excited. this is how it looks this year. And you've got to come see it. You've got to come take pictures, because I just counsel patience in those sorts of things. And then when you get into like installing warm season grasses, you really got to work with people and manage their expectations of what that's going to look like in the end. The more we can show them examples of, I know in the pandemic, it's hard to get people to like go places and stuff, but if we have good pictures or somebody who's willing to talk to them about, you know, how did you get to this point? That really helps. That networking, gosh, you can't beat it. And then when we have good success, I like to encourage people to tell their neighbors or tell their friends that, you know, yeah, we work with you.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Susan said. I would also add that it takes repeated conversations. You're not signing somebody up for a program based on one conversation. That's not good for them, us, or the program. So it really, again, where exactly are they at? What do they want? I do say that they're not held to anything until they sign a contract or are approved for funding, because some people really get anxious about all this time and effort. And it's like, look, unfortunately, we're not always good about giving costs up front. Like, this is the design, this is how much it's going to cost, or this is the practice, your new practice, here are the expected costs to do up front all at once. Some of it can be a little bit gray, but when they see the numbers along with the practice, they get more comfortable. But it is kind of a hand-holding experience to get there, and some kind of research is needed with that also, whether it's on our part or other more scientific research organizations. Yeah.
One of the things that I've seen Colleen here do, which I think is really good for managing expectations, is for one of our CSP contracts, she gave them, like, she had several folders for them which had highlighted their expectations. Like, it was very clearly outlined what was required of them for each year, because that was a big contract and lots of practices going on. So if it wasn't laid out like that, then they would have. It's confusing to me, so I don't know how they would have figured it out otherwise. So yeah.
So another question directed to our NRCS friends here. It seems like RCPP could be potentially a great tool to direct some additional financial and or technical assistance resources around soil health to permanently protected farmland. What suggestions would you have for any state or local partners who might be interested in pursuing such a project through RCPP? Or are there already projects that are funded through RCPP? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, so as far as the NRCS RCPP program, once things are funded, it's public of who the partner organization is, the funds that are associated. I would suggest that anyone interested talk to partners that have gone through the process. Some partners have started the process, not finished it for various reasons. Talk to them, look at the existing programs to see what exists. Not only look at Maryland, but surrounding states, because they can be multi-state projects that Maryland is associated with, but we're maybe not necessarily the primary. You can also look at some projects within the state or elsewhere that have been renewed and see what parameters those were following. Again, you can have things focused on soil health, but a lot of these RCPP projects are often associated with other initiatives, things that the state's doing, things that collaborative nonprofits are doing together. So if you can look at what they're doing as a whole, and maybe you have an idea or you've been approached by a lot of landowners saying, hey, we see a need for this. I would look at it from that angle. I would also say it's competitive. So just like everything else, it depends what you're putting in and when you're putting it in. So if you do go through and you're not selected one year, I would definitely reapproach it again.
With NRCS programs, I'm not sure that a RCPP project could target only a specific type of land. Do you know, Jordan? Could they say only permanently preserved agricultural land is eligible? I think that overall, all agricultural lands would have to be eligible, but the outreach, of course, could target those people with the permanently preserved land.
Yeah, I believe you're correct on that front.
So if you were, for instance, saying writing a proposal to focus on, I don't know, it could be the whole state or a region within the state to target those people, you could mention in your proposal that your outreach is going to be partly targeted at these people, but you would want to include the resource concerns, because permanently preserved ag land is not a resource concern. Remember, we say with NRCS and RCPP, it's got to address these resource concerns and improve them. So, working within that framework, we're always addressing resource concerns. That's how we rank, that's how we assess. And so keep that in mind as you're looking at what we're asking for. We'll have a list of the primary resource concerns that that program is focusing on, or that farm bill. Every 5 years, as Jordan mentioned, our focus might change subtly or majorly based on what resource concerns they want us to focus on. And then within the state, we narrow things down by resource concerns sometimes.
Yeah, correct. Even the easement projects that come in, they're going to also, you think, well, it's land protection. They might have a resource concern of saying you have to have X amount of buffer in a certain areas, and kind of focus in on the type of lands that are there.
I can provide some insight from the other side, because ESLC did apply for and receive an RCPP easement grant last year in the last round. And I guess what I would say to everybody is there's a lot of growing pains. That's no offense to the USDA folks, but there's a lot of stuff you got to learn and understand about the program. We're still struggling to understand it as we're trying to figure out stuff for the project agreement. But I think just talking to your NRCS folks and getting everything sort of set in your mind correctly, because I feel like the program runs different than any other program we work with. And so it's a lot of work, it's a lot of growing pains, but I think it's well worth it, because it is a heavily funded source that we can use for our landowners.
I could not agree more.
So I've got one final question, then I'll open it up to see if there are any other questions or insights that y'all want to share. This one is also directed to our NRCS colleagues. What are the ways that participants can provide input to NRCS state ranking criteria and program priorities? Are they able to join the state technical committee? Are there working groups for specific programs that they can join? What are some opportunities, and how might they follow up if they are in fact interested in doing that?
Well, David mentioned growing pains. We are changing a little bit the way our local input is received, but all of the programs are always supposed to be seeking local input. You are correct, the state technical committee, those are open meetings that people can attend, they can become involved, and they can give their input into sometimes it's particular standards, sometimes it's particular criteria within a standard. resource concerns, there is periodically time, if you can take the opportunity, or we get the opportunity to affect the cost list, some of the components of that, if we have enough data to back our need to increase a certain unit cost or something like that. And then each county does have a local work group that is stood up at the time that we're developing the ranking criteria for the new fiscal year. That's usually in the fall of the year. There will be a meeting. We're not always advertising well. It's the districts who would be doing the advertising of these local work group meetings. But we are piloting a slightly different way of managing local funds. So I can't really speak to what's going to happen this fall and next year. They did have $100,000 per district or per county was available for the local work group to manage the ranking criteria. So that's $230,000, I guess, or whatever that is. No, I've got my decimal point wrong. Is that 2.3 million? Of the state's EQIP funding was given to the counties directly. Some counties didn't take that up. Other counties did. One year we used, in Calvert, we used all but $2 of our $100,000. Other years, we used very little of it. So because that interest is sort of waxing and waning, and our ability to sell the program comes and goes, or not having enough applicants who are ready to go to contract, it is a deterrent. Sometimes that's just staffing within the partnership and the districts. So as I said, we are a little bit undergoing a change there. But if somebody were really interested in having input, they should probably talk to the district manager and the district conservationist in the county they're in to see how they can participate. And I would encourage them to understand, to learn about these resource concerns, how we use them so integrally to rank and evaluate an application.